In an era of celebrated neoliberalism backed by fervent capitalism, diversity has become the word of choice to describe the progress made, primarily in Western nations, in the fight against racism. Noting that diversity is a broad and overarching term, I will only be discussing diversity with regards to race and gender. In her article entitled Embodying Diversity, Problems and Paradoxes for Black Feminists, Sarah Ahmed calls diversity a numbers game. Ahmed argues that organizations base their progress and success with respect to diversity on the number of non-white bodies that are employed in their institutions. According to Ahmed, these organizations render themselves equitable and free of racism by drafting up documents to proclaim that they value diversity, and by portraying images of their diverse workforce. This portrayal, she argues, boasts an affective appeal. Diversity becomes what Ahmed calls a technology of happiness, and as such, diverse institutions are branded as progressive, anti-racist, and even post-racial. What does this mean for the bodies that color these spaces of diversity? There's a silencing, a forced compliance, and a kind of tokenism that comes with doing diversity. A black woman employed in a university that has a primarily white, male-dominated workforce is supposed to be enthusiastic because her mere presence symbolizes the university's success at doing diversity. Charmaine Williams argues that scholars of color, like herself, are regularly disciplined to suppress the experiences that reveal the barriers in place for those outside the mainstream academic culture. The person of color, and for our purposes the black woman, becomes a token of diversity. Like Ahmed, Williams suggests that there's a burden placed on colored scholars to not only comply with their status as hypervisible minorities in positions of privilege, but also to be happy with that status. According to Ahmed, this enthusiasm is oppressive because it works to glorify the institution for its work, rather than focusing on the fact that the space is still largely dominated by white male bodies. In addition, she points out that diversity becomes about changing perceptions of whiteness rather than changing the whiteness of organizations. That is to say, diversity works like a marketing strategy, depicting a happy, friendly, and seemingly multi-ethnic institution without actually working to employ more persons of color. The institution, in turn, benefits from this portrayal and sometimes even receives awards for its diverse workforce. This has a rather regressive effect. It takes attention away from the pertinent and ongoing issue of institutional racism. How is this done by institutions? By focusing all their efforts on marketing happy diversity, Ahmed argues that institutions keep our attention from what is bad, from what gets under the skin. In a sense, the word racism is barred from use, marked as a taboo for its negative connotations. Affect is also at play here because racism becomes a parallel to diversity, a paradox even. The two seemingly can't coexist, because the presence of diversity is supposed to portray the absence of racism. Racism is a negative word, and the mention of it is perceived as a sign of what Ahmed calls a stubbornness, paranoia, or even melancholia. She goes on to say that if you embody race for them, then they do race through you, which can be a way of not doing race. This statement quite boldly reveals the danger of taking a word like diversity at face value. By highlighting the presence of non-white bodies in spaces that have long been occupied by the most privileged group in the patriarchal order, middle-aged white men, diversity is being presented as a solution. This dilutes the issue of institutional racism. A university brochure representing students of different races is a good example of this type of branding. Because of these hypervisible minorities on the brochure, the space is thought to be diverse, progressive, and as such not racist. The reality of the situation may be that these bodies
created using Powtoon